to you, and then I will present a breakdown of the planning stages, so you will see how how this journey progressed. I will also share some of my students' work with you, so you can see how their work upgraded throughout this journey, and you will also see some examples of successful projects. And then we will focus on the successes and lessons learned. Finally, we will wrap up with reflection, where we focus on assessment. And if you have any questions, you can ask me at the end. So before I move on, let me just give you a little bit of time, about 30 seconds, to have a read. This is a summary of my abstract. Project, I'll give you a little bit of context. So I think some of you here told me that you've tried PBL. Anyone else who's tried PBL in their classes? It's just you. All right, so I'll just give you a very quick overview. So PBL is a dynamic approach. So it's mostly focused on real world problems. So you find solutions to real world problems. So for example, in this project, we were focusing on sound pollution. And also students use the language that they would in real life situations. So it's very practical. Next, it's very student centered, which means the teacher is just a facilitator. You're not, you take a step back and you sort of facilitate the students, you provide them with the necessary resources, you give them access to the material, but the students are doing most of the work. And as you can see here, any PBL course consists of the 4 elements here, and you will see that this project also covers all of this. So, just a little bit of background. I trialed this project with a mixed ability class of upper primary 8 learners, so which means they were about 10 and 11 years old. They were all, their first language was Sinhalese and Tamil, and they all went to state schools in Sri Lanka. So just to give you some context, in Sri Lanka, the state schools, we do not they don't follow a communicative approach. It's very traditional. Grammar is just controlled practice. So PBL was something very new to them. And however, this class was of a very high level. The students were of almost like a B1, B2 level. So although they were primary compared to some of the other primary classes, these students were pretty high level. And just to give you some context, at the British Council, we use, every term, we use magazines like this. So every magazine focuses on a theme. So my project was based on this magazine, which is called Sound and Music. The theme was basically, we looked at how sound travels, instruments, and so on. Some of my colleagues also tried it with other magazines like Rubbish, Let's Eat. So the project was making smoothies and things like that with very low levels. So we had this magazine, we had the resources, but we had some challenges as well. So the first thing was, in Colombo, we wanted to focus on student engagement and progress across all age groups and levels. Secondly, we had this magazine, and we also follow the flipped approach in Colombo. So we had an LMS that goes with this. So we had the LMS, we had this, we had the LMS was called Learning Hub, so the students come prepared. So we had this, but how do we exploit the material? As teachers, we needed some help with that. And then using a global product at a local level was a challenge. Because there were some parts of this which we, or myself, or even the students couldn't relate to. There were some of the lessons. And also because, like I said, my students were of a high level. So certain elements of this magazine, for example, Learning Time with Sean, they did not find it as challenging. So there was no point really doing that. The students were bored when we did it with them, when I did it with them in the previous magazine. So we had to find a solution to all of this. And that's when PBL came in. So I'm just going to give you a breakdown of this is just a summary of the whole journey. And we used a digital portfolio. However, the same can be replicated even in a face-to-face setting. I just used the same template and we used Google Slides. Now, I'll take you through the stages. I'll take you through each of this so that I'll show you an example portfolio and take you through each of these stages so it's a bit clearer to you. I'll show you this portfolio that I'm going to show you was one of the most successful projects. So we provided the students with this template, and I would tell them, we would take them through each of these different component stages. However, they had the liberty to design it, they had the liberty to add pictures, present the information in any way they want. So they really had complete control over the presentation of this project. So the first thing to do is to define the challenge. Now, it's important that they are hooked onto the challenge from the beginning of the project. So in my case, since it was sound and music, I presented it using a YouTube video which illustrated the problems of sound pollution in Colombo, the city that we come from in Sri Lanka. So just after the video, I had students saying, oh, like, Miss, I have the same problem. It's so distracting when we have to study. So I think that was a great idea because it got them hooked onto the project right from the beginning, and it was something that they could relate to. The next thing is for students to write down what they already know. So this is why we do this is because later we can assess the students and see how much they've progressed. So I started off only knowing this much, but towards the end of the project, there's so much more that I learned. So this was the first thing that we did. And then it's a good idea to assign roles. So this was called My Team. Since we were dealing with sound, I gave them the role of sound engineers. And depending on what the project is, their roles could change. And it's a good idea to give them roles because they appear to be more confident because they're no longer themselves. They're not afraid to make mistakes because they are now sound engineers. And that's something, and it makes it more interactive and more engaging for the students. So once My Team was done, we move on to My New Language. So here, although this is the next stage, I did it slightly differently. After every session, I got the students to make a note of some of the new vocabulary that they came across. So they had a record of the new vocabulary. And then towards the end of the project, we come to this section of the portfolio. We get students to choose the words that they want and add a few of them. So they have a record of more words, but they only add the words that they choose to, that they find interesting or that they want to remember. So this is a good way to train learners, and it's a useful study skill for them because they can't possibly memorize all of the words. So they choose their star word and a few words here. Also, just to let you know, these stages were not done in one lesson. This whole project was done across 8 weeks. So every lesson, every week, we would focus on each stage. Moving on, it was my research. So in my research, they were given some guidelines and they were supposed to research and find out more information that they would need for their final product. So a good idea here is to use a KWL grid. So if you're not familiar with it, K, what I know, W, what I want to learn, and L, what I learned. So using a KWL grid in this part of the project really helped them because it gave a sense of focus, and the students chose what they want to find out about and what they want to learn. So again, they're in complete control. So we did the research. Here they also developed skills like writing skills like question forms and the sub skills of reading like skimming and scanning. And we just saw this morning that grammar should not be taught explicitly. So question forms were addressed here. So that was an interesting way to deal with it. And one other very interesting thing here was the My Sources. So although they were primary learners, we had a small discussion on how they find information, little things like plagiarism, citing, where to find information, and so on. So that was interesting because that's, again, a study skill that they would carry with them outside the classroom. So once my research was completed, this is my world. The purpose of this stage is to build students' awareness of the world around them, of their surroundings. So here we focused on decibel levels. So it was interesting because when I went into breakout rooms to monitor their discussions, I had students saying, like, when my brother shouts, I think it's this many decibels, and in our school library, I think it's this many decibels. So I think as educators, when we provide them with that platform, so they do notice this, but we just need to provide them with a platform to discuss and sort of notice it further. So we did this, my world, to build some awareness. And finally, based on all of the knowledge they gathered through the research and from the My World stage, they create their design. So learners discuss, so they've done research on what kind of material will be suitable for soundproofing and so on. So they use all of that knowledge that they gain to design a prototype. So at this level, they're just discussing, they're designing, there are student-generated targets, they discuss what would make a successful soundproof ear muffler, and they also have a success target in mind. So finally, they once they design it, they go home, they build their prototype, they create their first design. Based on this design, they create their prototype and they bring it to class the following week. And now, this is when we sort of use the student-generated targets, we use the rubric that we came across, and we test the prototype. So it's very important that we remind them and prompt them of different ways to sort of test it. So in my class, they came up with suggestions. For example, they could use an app to see if the soundproof ear muffler actually works, because they needed to see if their prototype or if their design actually worked. Finally, so here they made use of peer assessment because they were giving feedback on each other's work. They also learned to critique each other's work, and they also learned to take criticism and constructive feedback as well. So we've done the prototype, they've improved, they have suggestions for improvement. They take it back home the following week and they improve it. They bring it to class, and this is the final design. This was actually the ear muffler created by the student, and it was a successful project. She used a decibel meter, an app actually, if I'm not wrong, it was called Decibel X, to show us, to prove that it works. So they also have a small description. So over here, it's a good idea because it gives them that sense of achievement. So you could stop here. This was the final design. They created their soundproof ear muffler, and you could move on to the reflection. However, in their project, they had an additional challenge, which was to advertise the ear muffler and sell it by creating a commercial. So this was not a lesson in the magazine. I had to give them some input on advertising techniques and so on. And based on that, they create an advertisement. So I thought I'll show you an example of one of the commercials that was created by one of my students, because then you would see how their work upgraded throughout, and you will see how it started. It just started as a sketch and where it ends. Yes. So let's just watch a short video.
Time for me is starting out. How can I study when there's a lot of sound pollution going on? Then why don't we use this? This is one of the best ear mufflers.
Are you facing to the same problem? Then you better buy our ear muffler. Because of the great soundproof materials we use, it's one of the best ear mufflers that you can ever get. Our ear muffler comes in 6 different colors. They are red, yellow, blue, green, purple as well as grey. Because of our special edition, there's a wood version as well. Just head to the website earmuffler.com and then add it to your cart immediately. Because of our special sale, it's not $50 anymore, it's only $30.
It's too much.
This is on this sale, so make sure you buy it immediately. Our earmufflers are the best.
Great.
Thank you, everyone. And yes, coming from a 10-year-old, he was the only boy in class, and he was really shy. He wouldn't even speak at the beginning of the course. And I wanted to show his video because that showed like a huge difference from the beginning of the course to the end. So once we finished that, we moved on to my reflection. So here they got a chance to self-assess. They actually reflected. There was honest feedback. It was not just I enjoyed it and I loved it. There was this evidence, there was validation. There was also peer feedback. There was opportunities for peer feedback. I actually amended this a bit. It was just what my teacher thinks, but I changed it to what my teacher and friends think so that it allows peer assessment as well. And also I think another important part here was the next time, because they understand that learning does not stop. It's something that's ongoing and they need to keep developing and working on it. So this was their reflections on the project. So I think it was extremely successful with that class. I think it gave them that right amount of challenge because like this class could actually handle, like, you know, even we discussed slogans and so on. So slogans from background music, we looked at different examples of advertisements and TV commercials, and that's how they came up with that video. So with that, we end the PBL journey. So yeah. There were some challenges. Since we're running out of time, I will just allow you to look at it, and then if you have any questions, we can talk about it during the Q&A. These were some of the challenges that we faced. However, these challenges were addressed because the learners were hooked throughout the project, and that was the initial, when you define the challenge, that's something that we need to keep in mind. And also because they were independent, it was completely student-led. They took ownership of it. They chose their colors, they chose their fonts, they chose the text and how they wanted it to look like. So they were in complete control and they felt it was their own. The next thing is I had roles. So every week I would have roles like this. I would appoint the leader, so there is a rotation. The leader and the rest of them negotiate and decide. So we would like switch these badges across. So there's a scribe, there's a speaker, and so on. So they would negotiate and decide on the roles, and that made it. So I just had to sort of observe them only, and there was absolutely no talking done by me during the discussion. All portfolios were completed by the end of the term because they were given that time. So every day before the lesson, before we moved on to the next stage, I would give them about 10 minutes at the beginning of the lesson to sort of catch up and fill in any gaps they have in their portfolio, because they are busy, they have school homework and so on. So that additional 10 minutes at the beginning of the lesson helped everyone complete their work. Finally, constructive feedback. There was some learner training done here, but giving that, teaching them what feedback means. It means it has to be positive, encouraging, but also give them some action points, not just good, I like it, or terrible. So giving them that input, giving them that sort of training really helped, because by the end, they did the feedback really well. And I think I spoke about this before, allowing peer feedback. So finally, my thoughts on this. I think although it is not regular assessment, and I think one thing is student-led. One of the strategies we used was student-generated rubrics. So that was one of the modes of assessment. Secondly, the portfolio itself was a solid sort of example, because they started off knowing only about three to five things, but towards the end, they were able to identify something as complex as persuasive devices. And also, I think anecdotes. So I made observations throughout. I made a note of their successes, their strengths and challenges. So towards the end, when we had a discussion with the parents who were also impressed, I had some solid evidence to show them. So that brings us to the end of the PBL journey.
Thank you.
And if you have any questions, you can ask.
Thank you very much. It was brilliant. I think your students are really lucky to have you as their teacher.
Thank you.
We've got about 8 minutes left for questions, so
Just a really quick one.
Once a week, exactly.
So what is the aim, or what are the aims of the lesson, of the project?
So they were given a challenge at the beginning. The challenge was to sort of create soundproof ear mufflers. And the aim was to basically address a real world problem. So we chose sound pollution because that's something that they can relate to as well. Yeah.
So every week you meet a student and you didn't have any intervention, just let them do with their partners, right? Or did you give any assistance to the student?
I would just, like I said, I would just facilitate and assist them. However, they took complete control of it. And also, maybe if this was a lower level class, they would need more assistance from me. But since they were more independent, and because they were trained, they've been with me for, when we did this project, they were already with me for 2 terms, and this was their final term. So they sort of knew the routines and how it works. So I didn't have to really give them a lot of assistance because they handled it more independently.
How many students are there involved in the project? And I just want to add something. That is, if there are more students, that means 50 or 60 students in a class, what would we can do that at the moment?
Okay, that's a tricky one, because at the British Council we don't have more than 20 students in a class. However, I think it's still possible. That's when learner training comes in. So I think at the beginning it is a bit time consuming. So even my students, there were some who were